All right, we are live. Sorry, we are 1 minute late. Matt and I were chatting behind the scenes. Um, but yeah, thrilled to welcome you all back to another reward hour. Today, we're going to be talking about how to make pay for performance work and why most companies get it wrong. And I couldn't be happier to have Matt McFarlane with us for a whole hour to chat away on all things to do with comp. Matt, do you want to introduce yourselves for folks who might not know you, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, amazing. Excited to be here, even though it is 8 p.m. because I'm in Australia. So it is Tuesday evening for me. Um, what is there to say? Hello, my name is Matt. Really excited to be here. My background has been primarily people ops. So I've worked in more of a like a generalist HR role for most of my career. But it's always compensation's always been a cornerstone of that. I've always been responsible for how our company thought about pay, how we kind of made it happen. And after having that responsibility for a lot of those different parts of my career, decided, hey, I actually quite like this. I was getting a lot of feedback from my network that it was a real challenge, as I'm sure many of you who join us today can attest to. And so thought, okay, well, I don't know what a gap in the market looks like, but why not dive into that? And yeah, for the past 2 years, I have been running my own business. I'm a solopreneur. My business is called Foundation, and I help startups build their first compensation fundamentals. So I help them with their comp philosophy. I help them build their job level frameworks. I help them get uh, like a handle on their salary band and kind of be able to use that structure to grow and scale as a business. So that's the exciting stuff I get up to day to day.
And it's really exciting, and it's a
It is.
massive pain point for, companies of all sizes and all scales.
Mm.
It's certainly one of the reasons why I joined Ravio. For those of you who don't know us, Ravio is a piece of software that helps make compensation work for everyone. And the reason that I joined Ravio was exactly as you said, Matt. Like, compensation was always the most painful part of my year as an HR professional, and it never got better. And I always felt underserved by, various providers that I had partnered with, various data providers, various software workflow automation tools, and so I was so sort of motivated to, find a better way that in the end I thought, well, I'm going to join the team that builds the better way. But yeah, it's certainly been a fun journey, and of course, like everything that is a challenge is always harder than you think it will be at the start,
Mm.
and that's definitely been the case here as well. Um, Super. A tiny bit of housekeeping. We have, so we'll be using some polls to get audience feedback on various questions. They should just pop up if I do everything correctly on my side. Do use the chat functionality either to ask questions. There's also a questions sort of tab. For me, it's on the right-hand side of my screen, right at the bottom. So don't hesitate to use that. Hopefully, it'll be a really informal conversation and just a nice chat. But hoping to get lots of questions in at the end as well. If you do, if I'm able to sort of multitask and keep an eye on the questions, we might be able to tackle them head on. Otherwise, we'll leave them to the end.
Amazing.
Super. Well, great. Let's get going. So I think the first poll that we're launching just to get everything started is so the question does your company use pay for performance? And the options are yes extensively, yes partially, no, or not sure. um Submit my vote. Great. Uh yeah, let's see what comes in. Okay,
Oh, big
so
on the yes partials.
yes partially, yep, exactly. um
I'd love
so
to.
we've got about,
Yeah, I was going to say
yeah.
I'd love to hear what the partials, where the partials land from some people if they want to jump in the chat. That's for sure.
Um, I voted yes, partially because while we think while we do pay for performance, we also try and target a pretty high percentile on base salary.
Mm,
So that was why we don't sort of shortchange people on their base salary and then be really aggressive on performance. So it's a bit of a
mm.
balance. Um, Jenna partial, just doing it this performance cycle as well. I think, yeah. I mean, Matt, what are some examples of pay for performance that you've seen in your experiences that have worked well, and which haven't, and why do you think that might be the case as well?
Yeah, it's a good place to start because I think this is why I was so curious about the responses around partial versus extensively. I think I have been the recipient of, I have, been the deliverer of, I have been the builder of a number of different pay for performance programs, and they can take so many different shapes. So I think the most common ones that I see, and the ones that I suspect are what people are probably most experienced with, is like merit-based pay. So, you've had a strong year, you get a higher percentage, increase or something like that on your base salary, and then we go on and we do another year's worth of work and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
But there's so many more, and I've experienced I think all of them. Apart from, yeah, there's a couple some weird ones that I've heard of before that I can talk about later. But I mean, when I think of pay for performance, I think of, so obviously merit pay, and I think it's like related, I guess, cousin in some respects is when companies instead deliver that as a bonus rather than a pay increase. Um, there's equity, which is a real long term incentive. I think, depending on the makeup of people and companies on the call, have a lot of them have probably experienced it, especially if they're in the tech sector. Profit shares has been one that I've experienced as well, and I actually quite like as a pay for performance program. Um, then there's, I guess, bonuses tied to either KPIs or discretionary. There's so many. I mean, there's the other one as well, though, which you mentioned, Vaso, which again I'm quite partial to, which is like, I think was really popularized by Netflix, which is like, we're just going to pay incredibly high salaries. We expect, really high performance and outcomes and these sorts of things. And that's kind of the baseline for where we sit from a performance perspective. And so that, in my mind, that's a pay for performance program. So I've experienced all of them. I lie. I haven't experienced Netflix pay. I haven't I haven't had that
Sadly.
sweet 99th percentile salary before. Please jump in the chat and let me know if you have, and tell me what that's felt like. But I think all of them have their pros, their cons, their kind of benefits and their drawbacks. I mean, merit pay is probably, I mean, arguably the most contentious one. I think, you know, what are the drawbacks? There's, the decision around, your rating is a contentious one. Is it one where it's highly discretionary and it's at the decision of your manager, only your manager? Or is it highly, routine in the sense that it's delivered via a 360 and calibrations and all of those sorts of things? That can be one, either end of the spectrum there can be a real negative. I think equity is having an interesting moment at this point in time. I think, for me, it's one of those, classic kind of programs that tries to develop an ownership mentality. But I think, to do with a lot of reasons, but things like, sort of flailing or stagnating salaries. I think high cost of living, people are much more preferring to focus and be keen on the cash side of things than equity. I think we're also seeing, equities are sort of a hallmark of the software industry. I think a lot of
Mhm.
startups are in a troubling time, and so I think people look at it with a lot more like dismissiveness in the sense of like, will I ever see a return on this? So I think it's having its own challenges, but I think that's also brought about a lot of the time to do with like a real lack of I think companies connecting people and their equity grant to an outcome and an incentive as well. So there's a lot of different threads to pull up there. Um, Yeah, what's worked well? I mean, I like I mentioned, I quite like profit shares. Now I appreciate I'm saying that, and my background is, startup technology businesses that often aren't profitable. But when I've been in organizations and I've worked in a range of different industries, yes, Becky, when there's no profit, they don't work that well. But when you're in a profitable organization, I tend to find that there's something that, for me, in organizations where, and I'm speaking very much to sort of businesses that have, that employ knowledge workers here. They're people that are kind of dealing with sort of creative issues and problem solving in these, no 2 days necessarily the same. They're sort of amorphous. I think profit shares for me create a real, like, we're in this together type of mentality around the business and its goals and its people and all these sorts of things, rather than trying to, differentiate pay with respect to individuals and their own goals or their own behaviors, which, you don't have to go far to find the research around how that can often be quite detrimental in terms of how it narrows, perspectives, and how it has all of these other kind of destructive behaviors as well. So, yeah, I think I'll sum that up by saying there's a lot of different ways that you can pay for performance. Some of them are good depending on the type of work you're doing, the way in which you've designed them. Some of them can be really tragic in the sense that they sort of, are sort of working counter to the goals that you have as a business, and that sort of a thing as well.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, you definitely have to be very wary of the behaviors that you want to incentivize through your pay for performance, like philosophy. And
Yeah.
it's kind of really hard to backtrack from it. Say you've got like a couple of quarters that, you've incentivized heavily on individual, I don't know, in individual sales output. And then suddenly you've got a million people issues, a team is falling apart, you've got loads of churn. Actually this has backfired big time. So there's definitely something around, thinking longer term about the incentives that you're prepared to offer.
Mm,
Um, Also, and in line with thinking longer term is making sure that, it's very difficult to offer employees a very generous compensation scheme, incentive scheme, whatever it might be, benefits, um, and then have to pull it back when the market slumps or when the company is not doing as well. So it's really
mm,
very painful to take something away from people. Really hard message to land as an HR leader as well. So there's something about thinking longer term about, are we always going to be prepared to offer it? And if not,
mm.
that's fine. We can time box it, but
Yeah.
let's be clear about how long this is going to go on for. What are some other methods that you've seen work for certain types of companies? For example, some of our smaller clients
Mhm,
uh, who may not have unlimited budgets for a really aggressive pay for performance module.
mhm,
I've seen something that's been coming up more and more on my radar is offering a paid sabbatical, for example,
mm.
to high performing employees. What are some more like creative ways to incentivize or reward performance that you've seen that are effective, and which ones do you think are a bit maybe a bit gimmicky?
Oh, wow. I mean, the classic gimmick is like the gym membership, right? Like I know I've been guilty of doing this before as well myself in the past. Yeah, we want healthy employees, and we want everyone to go to the gym, and they're going to take less sick days, and they're going to work harder because they're all going to have six packs. And then you implement the gym, the scheme, and of course, it's only the people who are already going to the gym that sign up for it. Like I think there's those kind of like classic things where, and this will probably be a theme of our conversation, and again something I've been guilty of in my career, which is, I've heard of some best practice, or I feel like I've got the answer to a problem that I haven't even tried to fully understand, and I've gone and implemented it, and then we've realized that we're paying, good money that, to be honest, a lot of people probably would have preferred just as going straight on their base salary.
Yeah.
So the ultimate gimmick from my perspective is putting in place anything that you haven't actually, thought about the kind of impact you're trying to drive, and spoken to the people that, who will be delivering that impact. Um, in terms of like, what's some more novel things that are out there? I actually had one come up the other day, which surprised me, and again, I think speaks to this ability to kind of like have your ear to the ground around the kind of talent you're trying to hire, what it is that really appeals to them. But someone mentioned Azure credits. So this is like Microsoft's cloud platform, I think, from off the top of my head. They were finding that the candidates that they were trying to hire were really interested in being given these credits. They could go and build stuff, and I just thought that was such a clever example of a way that a startup can be, quite responsive to something that is unique to the type of person that they're trying to hire. Probably isn't being offered by the larger, more institutional types of organizations that that are also trying to hire that talent. I think it overlays very neatly with the kind of work that they're doing, and in many ways just goes to show that even outside of the 9 to 5, they're really driven by just the passion and the curiosity of like solving interesting problems and building things, and growing a familiarity with the technology that is relevant to their work. So I thought that was a really cool kind of example of a way in which, and again, this was a small startup here in Australia. And yeah, it was just such a novel sort of approach. And now I saw there's a question: how did that work exactly? That's a good question. I didn't ask them for too much detail of like a plan design or anything like that. But I think that also kind of almost speaks to another thing around small organizations, is like, I think we don't want to try and like overthink structure too much too soon when it comes to these sorts of things. I think, yes, if there's room for bias or something like that in the case of like the design of it, but yeah, I think from my perspective, just there's ways to like offer things like that that are can be sweeteners to getting someone across the line, then I like that as well. One that I'll be curious in the comments if this one's like a little more contentious. I'm actually a really big fan in small companies of the discretionary bonus. Now, I quite like it for a couple of reasons. I don't tend to like more traditional bonuses in terms of like there's a KPI hanging over your head. You kind of have to hit this number.
Mhm.
Because I think it brings with it a lot of the sort of destructive tendencies that often come from like picking a KPI and having someone focus solely on that to the exclusion of all else. I like discretionary, again, I'll emphasize, in smaller companies, because I think you probably really have the intimacy of understanding of the work that your team is doing. You have really close proximity. You tend to have a stronger like cultural signal around like what great looks like. And I think in particular, the fact that you can kind of say to someone, hey, I'm gonna give you a discretionary bonus because I think you just absolutely crushed it at this one thing. I think that has such a compounding effect for those sorts of people. And I think, in tandem with the fact that you might be able to either have that one-on-one conversation, or if they're the kind of person like me that may like, getting sort of more public praise for being on a webinar at 8 p.m. So if you want to give me a little, no, it's but so understanding how your team responds well to motivation. But I also like, again, it's not based on a particular KPI, so it's not kind of like narrowing their lens to a certain outcome. What else was I going to say about that? I think it also needs to be small. So that's the other thing I would add. A few $1,000s, certainly less than 10 in sort of the Australian, UK or US currencies or something like that. I think it just needs to be something that's like a nice, small, it's impactful enough to say you've done a great job. You just need to be conscious of like ensuring that it can be relatively reproducible, in the sense that if somebody else also does similar, impact work, that you're making sure you're doing something like that.
Yeah,
And you're
totally
right.
agree.
There's people popping off in the comments around EU pay transparency. I appreciate that there's probably going to be some conflicts there. Also, I'm from Australia, so don't get mad.
But yeah, I think oh my god, there's lots of messages, right? So to Becky's point that discretionary bonuses are are great, but there is a lot of criticism around them being quite
Yeah,
subjective. uh, you know, yeah, unfortunately, I think there's very little that we can do to avoid that. But also, I feel very comfortable, telling our employee population that, their folks as managers, do know their work best, and have way more visibility on the quality and caliber of their work than than I do or our HR business partners do. So assuming that there's been a lot of work on upskilling managers and making sure that they're all sort of doing their jobs well. Folks can also make it easier for their managers to remember the great work that they've done by documenting appropriately and just being sort of front of mind. I think that's always helpful. But yeah, there will always unfortunately be a degree of subjectivity that I think we have to sort of own. And I will say that for discretionary bonuses as well, I think the surprise and delight element really goes a very long way as well. And I think that also buys great, the feeling of being recognized and feeling special, I think is wonderful, and buys a lot of goodwill to the company. Of course, assuming that base pay is at a normal level. We can't fake it. But that kind of discretionary surprise and delight element, I think, can be really effective.
Yeah. I think there's
UK
an
trans.
inevitable point where you grow out of it too, though, right? Like again, I think once you start introducing real layers of leadership, where unless you have an incredibly strong handle on your culture in terms of there's a real clear and consistent understanding of it, or at the very least it transitions from being a discretionary thing to a more formal program to make sure that you are controlling for biases and things like that. But and to be clear, like I'm really thinking like sub 50 employee type companies when I say that I like discretionary bonuses. I think any larger than that, and we probably start to introduce enough complexity that we want to just create some structure, some rigidity around it.
Yeah, agreed. And Charlotte, couldn't agree more that the guidelines need to be clear on when and why a discretionary bonus can be granted. And our role as HR folks is to make sure that, try and keep the bar of for the managers consistent. So try and have the generous ones come down and the strict ones come up a bit so that we sort of all meet at around the same point.
This might actually be a good point to jump in with. Like the other thing that I didn't mention from a pay for performance is there's this whole concept of like peer to peer, which I once tried to create a pilot for at a different place that I worked, but ended up leaving the organization before I had a chance to run it. But I really like the idea of like, the people that know the work best are the ones that you're kind of rubbing shoulders with and that you're delivering the work with. Can we find a way to use that context and that proximity to the work to just identify and as a team kind of nominate when it is that someone's due something like that. I think that's a great way to like start to introduce some structure, and again just de-lever the leader as kind of the only responsible person for making that sort of a call. So I quite like that concept, although I will caveat that by saying I've not seen that necessarily in action or necessarily done well. That's one I'd love to see more companies trial at the very least.
It's definitely so I've trialed it at a previous workplace, and it was really, really popular, which was really lovely. There wasn't a big monetary reward. It was just something nominal, but it was so popular. People loved it, and I was pleasantly surprised by how much it sort of caught on. And so one that I would definitely advocate for. Okay, so obviously, Matt, there's lots of clear advantages to paying for performance. We hopefully retain top talent, hopefully boost motivation, make sure we're incentivizing the behaviors we want to see. But there's also the drawbacks that we've mentioned, subjectivity. Sometimes we can accidentally incentivize short-term thinking. And there's also this constant stress. Oh, I greatly exceeded last quarter. What am I going to get this quarter? Oh my God, that kind of thing. For companies thinking about implementing a pay for performance philosophy from scratch, what what tips would you give them? What advice, what life advice would you give them?
Where to start for the various different kinds of pay performance? I think where I feel like I've gone wrong, or where the programs that I've been a part of in the past have felt like they've gone wrong, is where the business felt like pay for performance was the solution unto itself. And so they implemented merit-based pay, or they implemented a bonus program, or they implemented something to have the thing, and not to actually, I guess, move the needle on what it was that they thought performance was. So, I'll often start with, okay, if you want pay for performance, how are you actually defining performance? What is it that you want to see perform more, or that you want to reward when it is performing? I think you have to start with really the philosophy around what performance looks like at your organization, how it shows up. Is it something that should be the baseline for what people are doing, or is it something that is something that people can realistically stretch to without also compromising on some of the points that you mentioned before? Are they doing it at the compromise of collaboration? Are they doing it at the compromise of agility? Are they maybe been given a KPI that they're focusing so intently on that, as the business inevitably moves and shifts, or the market does, and we need to change that KPI, does that introduce problems? So I think starting from, like, first and foremost, what are we trying to incentivize here is the key thing that I've often seen get missed. And then I think the other one is just like not going too big too quickly. I'm a big fan of kind of using some of the, like, sort of product led thinking, in the sense of, like, again, what kind of an impact are you trying to have? Who is the kind of user group that you're hoping to have the impact with? Is it, broad based employees? Is it your sales team? Is it just your executives? Like, what's are we just trying to identify, like, and reward high performing managers? Or, what's the thing that we're tying this to? And then talk about, what the impact for the business is. How can we define what success looks like at the other side once this program has been successful? And then I mentioned going too big too soon. I mean, just try it out for a little bit first. Try the performance mechanics of it, maybe, before even assigning budget to it. Give yourself space to get a sense for, do we feel like there's, bias showing up in some way, shape, or form with respect to the design of the system? Do we feel like there's a chance for people to sandbag the goals and lower them so that they're more achievable? Do we feel like it's going to, I think everyone's heard of the famous Cobra problem, where, they introduced a bonus for bringing dead cobras, and then they were breeding cobras, and then it just became a whole issue. Like, so I think you need to think about, like, how are we potentially incentivizing the wrong behaviors of these sorts of things? And although feels incredibly, especially difficult to see, in particularly in startups, I think trying to, if you have the freedom, if you have the ability to try and run it for a cycle, and kind of get some of those bugs out of the system before necessarily going, across the business, if it's a broader program or something like that. But yeah, I think for me, bringing it all back to what fundamentally is performance and what are we trying to achieve is probably the most common, one of two most common skipped over points, I would say. The second, which is an area I love to talk about, is the communication. That's another one that I think a lot of companies miss a beat about, and even in very simplistic ways. Vaso, congratulations, you've had a phenomenal year. Here's a 5% pay increase. Our other top performers are getting 5% or 10% or whatever it is. They're just having that conversation and actually connecting the year that you had and the performance that you delivered to the incentive, and making that line really clear, rather than what I've had, what I'm sure many people on the phone have had before as well. Here's a letter, it's the end of the year, that's your pay increase. Off you go. We're up for another 12 months worth of work.
Normal work.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that for me is like, it's pay for performance, but like in its most sort of basic sense. And it isn't necessarily that incentivizing to then go, oh, cool, I got something that's like more noteworthy than maybe other people got because of these things that I did that are unique and really stood out. I think just like that's the piece that a lot of companies I think miss out on, and we, it's obviously a perennial sort of evergreen topic on places like LinkedIn, but helping your managers be able to convey these sorts of things and actually help people be high performers as well. That's a real missing link, I think, in a lot of pay for performance programs too.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think, it's a very special moment when it's good news for, for the person involved. And so really trying to, um, create a moment basically from
Mm,
that, from what will hopefully be a great conversation.
mm.
um, can be really really special in the employee life cycle. And one other thing that I found to be really effective and actually a really quick win is, it's great to get awesome feedback and recognition from your manager, but also it hits different when it comes from the CEO, the founder, the department head, whoever it might be. And it's usually, something that they want to do, but sort of haven't found the time. But sort of taking literally a few minutes out of their day to send a nice message or sit them down, shake of the hand, say, thank you so much for everything you've achieved this year.
Mm.
That goes a really, really, really long way as well.
Yeah.
Um, we have a question. We have a few questions. I know, Matt, you have an opinion on Ulrika's question, which is how would you typically handle high performers that are already paid way above their salary band? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying I have an opinion on everything. So, so, how do I handle high performers? I mean, there's a number of ways in which I'll I guess help coach or work with companies around this one. So one is that there's the classic sort of red box. You're at the top of your band. You're not going to get a pay increase unless either the band moves up over time through a market refresh or through you've been promoted or something like that. Uh, that can be particularly punishing, and where I think it's hardest to swallow is when the bands are new. So when I'm working with a company and for the first time they've introduced salary bands, I think that's when it can be a particularly tough pill to swallow, because there's naturally a sort of alignment process that has to happen between, what was formerly the wild, wild west of salaries to now a structured, cohesive framework. I would start by saying, if you've got a high performer who's starting to jump outside of your band, I fundamentally think that your salary framework needs to serve the business. And so if you find that that framework is starting to limit your ability to hold on to high performers or incentivize high performers or something like that, I think you potentially need to rethink the structure of that framework. Because yeah, if you're getting feedback from people that they aren't feeling necessarily incentivized, I mean, there's a lot of cultural reasons that potentially could be an issue as well. And maybe that's where you start to look at some of these alternative things that we talked about, sabbaticals, things like that. I think you just obviously want to really think about how to be consistent, how to be fair, how to make sure that you're not just applying that to a sort of once-off situation rather than. Sorry, I just saw a note saying someone couldn't see or hear me. Hopefully, that's not the case for everybody. Yeah, so I
I can
think
hear
okay,
you.
beautiful. That's the main one. Yeah, I think if it feels like if it's a once-off with a particular individual, then I think then that's maybe there's a case-by-case basis there to think about how to solve that. But then I think you probably want to take that and apply that. Think about how to embed that into your comp philosophy to make sure that that it can be something that's applied more consistently across the business.
Yeah, so agreed. And I also think this is one, so as you said, like this is one where we can use the more sort of creative incentives if it's appropriate,
Mm,
um, or a one-off spot bonus. It can also go some way, especially if it's for a reward for previous, for the year gone.
yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me. But also I've seen it where, some companies sort of say, you know what, we're not going to have a strict upper band.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
because it's hindering our strongest folks. Like if we can't promote them to, if there's no business need for a bigger role,
Mhm.
we're not going to make one up. We don't want title inflation. Actually, I'm totally happy to just not have a hard stop at the top end of a particular band
Mm.
for those for those realistically very few people
Yeah.
that will be like consistently at the top and keep performing so well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was some extra context there that jumped in around this is to do with salaries, where salaries have dropped
Yeah.
dramatically, which is that's a really challenging thing to deal with as an organization. I would actually say for potentially for that particular scenario, I would almost say like give them the salary increase as a lump sum so that you're not continuing to sort of compound their drift above band. But also like, I don't know of too many companies that I've seen them move a salary band down. And I guess that's just because I haven't always experienced consistent year on year declines in a particular role. But I guess that's where each company needs to make its own decision as to whether or not it wants to reflect that dip in the market or just hold firm until it inevitably picks back up and they just get the benefit of being more competitive for that particular skill set in the short term or for the next couple of years or something like that.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, agreed. And I hope it's not on the books that we're going to start seeing a progressive decline in a whole bunch of roles for a whole bunch of years. That's not going to be fun.
Yeah, this is where I think it's like you can be really market led by those sorts of movements, or you can kind of take a stand as a business and go, actually, we see that, but we choose not to recognize that. And you've clearly been able to afford that role at the rate you've been paying. So do you just take a position and say, let's just say it's $100,000 for the sake of a nice round number. If it starts to drop below that, do you say, well, actually, we're really comfortable maintaining that band because we don't believe that the value of that skill set to us has declined, or we don't necessarily want to see the band go backwards and things like that.
Yeah, agreed. Really interesting question from Emma. Uh, so Emma says, we're not currently using performance ratings, but we do operate merit-based pay. Oh my God, it's moved. Merit-based pay and ensures summary wording in written reviews clearly communicates whether someone is below meeting or exceeding performance expectations. What are the best ways you've seen to apply merit-based pay without performance ratings? We'll probably end up introducing ratings due to pay transparency, but interested to hear your perspective.
Merit-based pay without performance ratings. I can't say I've seen. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like what's so sorry. I'm just rereading the question. We're not currently use performance ratings. We do operate merit-based pay and ensure that summary wording and written reviews clearly communicate with someone's below. Okay, so it sounds like you do kind of have a rating in some respect. It sounds like there's probably some level of standardization between, and I would hope, especially if you're in Europe and you're coming into pay transparency directive, that you're probably calibrating the descriptions of performance and things like that, these sort of word pictures. Um, so yeah, I mean, maybe there's maybe more context needed there. I can't think of a time where I've experienced merit-based pay without necessarily having a merit rating for that one. Yeah, let me ponder that one some more and come back. And Emma, if there's any more context, obviously please jump in as well. What about you, Vaso?
Yeah,
Any?
yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, we've seen so things that I've seen are, I guess softer wording, so not quite, below meeting or exceeding
Mm,
expectations. Um, but the wording, it was just a nuance thing rather than a complete change in how we were thinking about essentially ratings. We've had numbers before, but obviously that's also a rating. Um, so yeah, interesting. So no,
I
it's
get,
not something that I've seen.
yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of like, I guess there's a company I've worked with recently that had I mean, I guess at a stretch, it's merit-based in some respects, but they rather than having a pay range or a traditional pay band, they had 3 pay points to a level. So it would be
Mhm.
like your kind of introductory pay point, you're coming in, you're finding your feet, you're building relationships, kind of onboarding. there's your sort of middle point where you're sort of, you're hitting your stride, you're delivering into the role effectively. And then there's the point above that, which is that you're kind of, you're the person that people at that level look to when you're kind of setting the pace and things like that. In some respects, I guess that's one way of doing it. It's still in some ways, I guess, a rating, but it's less of the more traditional sort of annual, below meets succeeds types of approach, things like that. Yeah, that's an immediate one that comes to mind. And that was a highly structured framework. So yeah, so again, every level had 3 pay points. So you were never paid anything different to one of those 3 pay points within the framework.
Mm-hmm. And I've actually found that framework to be really well received by employees, and I think it's down to clarity. So it's really clear to them. Okay, this is my pay for now. When I reach the sort of intermediate level, it comes up, etc. But that's it's not for everyone. You need to build the infrastructure behind it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work that goes into it, but typically I've seen that model be really, really well well received. We've got another question from Becky. What's your view on local versus global pay, and are you seeing more and more companies moving to global salaries?
We could spend a whole extra hour on this one. I have so many thoughts. The last company that I worked in was 650 people across 70 countries. So I've
Wow.
experienced quite extreme global pay structures. What's my view? Gosh, you can pick any one of 3 main approaches, I would say. One is that you pay everybody the same one rate, no matter where they reside in the world, which is a tricky one. There's the kind of regional approach where you bundle companies that have maybe similar salaries together into one regional band, or then there's the sort of hyper local. I tend to find it's generally larger organizations in my experience, like several thousand, tend to, maybe have the pockets and things like that, or not be that interested in the level of admin involved in very localized pay when they've got quite large global workforces. I tend not to see the organizations at my level, that sort of sub 500 headcount. I tend not to see them go with that, global pay.
Yeah.
It is hard, and I think you have to pick a range. You have to pick a salary or a location to benchmark to as well. And so, if you think about that in the sense of, like, unless you're picking San Francisco, you're not going to be able to employ someone anywhere in the world. So you kind of have to pick a place that you can afford that salary to be applied to, the scale of the workforce that you're hiring, and then you can sort of more easily hire downstream of that, so in cheaper geos, and it would be obviously harder to hire in more expensive ones. But yeah, there's so many different ways that you can take that path, and I think I've lost the question now, but if you want to hit me up, I'm happy to talk about my experience over LinkedIn or whatever, of that approach. But it's tricky.
It's basically it's a lot. So you need to go back to, I think, philosophy first. But no comp philosophy and no no location-based philosophy will be without its tensions. You just need to be comfortable with the tensions that you've chosen. And then we've had Victoria. Thanks for bringing back the question. Do you have any thoughts on tying base salary growth to both individual and team performance, perhaps even tying it to overall company performance? For example, part of salary growth comes from individual outcomes, part from company performance. We've only done salary growth based on individual contributions so far, on top of the market benchmark adjustment, but are researching other practices.
Yeah, some interesting approaches there. I mean, I tend not to love just base salary merit adjustments generally. Again, I think, the basis for which, if it's a rating, the basis for which the rating is determined can be really challenging. It can either be on one end of the spectrum, highly highly loose and sort of discretionary, or on the other end of the spectrum, you're introducing so much structure and so much overhead that the business is really smothered by it. I think to boot, depending on the kinds of things that you're or the things that you're rating, is that person tracking the same year to year? Have they had a great year in 2024 and then a less great year in 2025? And then and again, I'm sure a lot of people track these sorts of things over time, but if two people are doing the same job and Joe Bloggs has had a good 2 or 3 years and has received the highest rating for performance and obviously compounded the salary increases there, and then Mary this year, who's in the same job, has performed similarly well, we're now suddenly seeing, that she hasn't had the same pay increases. We're seeing this real disparity. So I think for me, base salary individual increases, I've never been a massive fan of for some of those reasons. The question around like, would you do it for the team or the company is interesting. I
Yeah.
think potentially at a team level. I mean, like group based ones. Again, I think in some respects you have the similar challenges, right? Like are you basing it on the right criteria? Are you doing it like in too discretionary a manner or too sort of structured a manner? I just for me, I'm like, I really just like plain and simple. I think like everyone kind of has a really relatively narrow range or a pay point to their salary band. I think it should move with the market so that they continue to be paid based on where you're sort of choosing from a percentile perspective. And I think some of the other pay for performance metrics, the ones, or pay for performance programs rather, are the ones that I tend to look more to, especially in an environment where again, we're looking for collaboration, we're looking for innovation, we're looking for all of these sorts of things that are really hard to kind of quantify. They're really hard to um, tie perfect examples to. And I think you want to try and foster that within your culture and then reward people through the organization's achievement and how the
Mhm.
collective as a whole has sort of, delivered on performance. And, there tends not to be a better reflection of performance for an organization than for the revenue that they've generated or the profit margin and things like that. So for me, that's sort of my preferred model. Because I think, yeah, merit-based individual salary. I mean, it's such a hallmark of the turn of the century industrial kind of era when people were smelting steel and things like that, right? Like it's scientific management from sort of the 1900s. So I tend to not love those approaches too much to get a
Mhm.
little opinionated.
Well, I think you can also sort of think about weighting, right? Like, and again, this will be, an investment bank will think about the weighting of individual performance pay and company performance pay
Mm,
differently to what a, Series B fighting for profit scale up will do. But making sure that the weighting between individual performance pay and company performance pay is, and that it's appropriate for that company at that point in time. I think that can be that can be effective too. We've got another question from Steve. We've sort of gone off script and just followed the questions.
a lot of
I
questions.
kind of like that. Yeah, great to have such participation from the audience. It sounds like we should do another one of these, Matt. So we're going to be hitting you up later. But yeah, a question from Steve. In your experience with performance ratings, are these best targeted against achievement of specific company or individual metrics with little room for subjectivity, or a more flexible managerial consideration of an employee's performance at year end?
Yeah, this comes back to sort of where I was going a little earlier around like you can either be on the like hyper discretionary end of the spectrum where there's sort of one person, traditionally the manager, making the decision around, whether or not someone has met below or exceeded like expectations in whatever form. Or you can go, okay, we recognize, all of the bias that is inherent with that and the fact that often the manager may not be the person closest to the work being performed to really tell us, what that can look like. And so we start to move further up the spectrum. And now the way companies have traditionally tried to do this is go, okay, well, let's, rather than just go, hey, manager, who do you think has performed best? Like the classic sort of stack ranking. Let's put, rank people from top to bottom, those sorts of things. Let's go based on the goals that we set. I think in more established organizations that can be more effective. I think in startups where I tend to focus, totally, totally really damaging to the organization in the respect that some of these companies haven't yet found product market fit, or if they have found product market fit, they're continuing to evolve that. They're potentially adding new products, they're potentially adding all of these sorts of things, and you need to be so responsive to the market that often setting a goal that even if it's for a quarter can sometimes need to change, and then suddenly
Yeah.
the whole overhead that goes into setting that goal has just been a total waste. And so I think that can be a real challenge of that kind of approach in certainly earlier stage companies. Another way, without necessarily going down that path, to try and mitigate for bias and discretion and things like that, is to introduce this kind of management overhead. So it's the 360 reviews, it's the getting lots of different points of view and doing write-ups and all these sorts of things. I think that for me can also be a real, especially in a fast-moving environment, can be a real tax on your ability to perform and focus on doing the
Yeah.
job. So that can be really hard. I'll go back to my point around like larger companies. I think it works better for larger companies because they tend to be much more stable. They've got a market, they've got a product. It's about fine tuning that, and it's about making sure that
Mhm.
that's like kind of like humming a little bit better. At the extreme where it can be really detrimental is the Kodaks, the Nokias, the companies who sort of start to face this real innovator's dilemma of, you've built a structure around making sure that the thing that we sell right now is the only thing that we sell, and we're optimizing for that. But the second something new comes along and challenges that system, it quite often defends against introducing digital cameras, for example, in a world of film cameras. It kind of prevents and defends against organizations going, oh, actually, maybe we should, invest time in developing that thing, because, and that's where I think you tend to face some problems. So it's a real, no doubt for some companies, there's a place on that spectrum that works really well for them. But I think you've just got to be cautious of not going too far to the discretionary end of the spectrum, and people have no trust or faith in how decisions are made or performance is quantified, versus the other end, which is that you get the people that hate performance reviews and it takes so much time and it's archaic and it's focused on the wrong goals and those sorts of things. So finding somewhere in the middle that's perfect, maybe there is a beautiful paradise in the middle there somewhere, but that tends to be quite difficult to find in my experience.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think one thing that we've been thinking a lot about lately is exactly how to make performance review season effective, but also not take over everybody's life during Q4, and sort of have everybody write essays of hopefully really effective and constructive feedback that still means that BAU gets pushed to the side. I
Yeah.
do think this is one where 80/20 will get you there. Feedback in well thought out bullet points that are succinct, concise, to the point. Um, will get you 80% of the way there. And personally, I'm okay with that. In this organization, in this point in time, it might not work for everyone, but it is.
Mm.
That's a trade-off that I'm prepared to make.
And kind of on
Um,
that one, I would jump in and say, like, back to your question around implementation, an approach that I found has created both incredible space for me as someone who is introducing and then running some kind of reward program, but also creates incredible buy-in and engagement from the workforce, is saying that this is our MVP. This is our first attempt. We believe we've
yes.
got, a good approach here, but we want your feedback. It's not going to be perfect, but here's the kind of outcomes we're hoping it will achieve. That kind of language does an incredible job of firstly just saying to everybody, oh, okay. And I feel like a lot of us probably on the call feel a lot of pressure when it comes to comp to have the answer and for it to be perfect and for it to be like, again, just 100%. I think just being upfront and saying, here's the kind of outcome we're trying to create, that gives you a lot of space to just say, we've tried something. it's not going to be totally useless, but like we're putting something out there. We really value your feedback and the buy-in that it generates from your workforce as well, who, again, they're probably used to having benefits programs that are the gym memberships that they don't care about. It's those sorts of things that they're sort of detached from. It gives them a real sense of like ownership and ability to have a say in how that frames up and works effectively for them. So I think using that kind of language, even with something that you feel is only 80% right, will go a long way to giving you and your team a lot of space, and also help on the buy-in side of things as well, in my experience.
Yeah, completely agree. Look, ultimately, we're asking for customer feedback, right, on our product, the product that we're shipping to our customers. And we did cover your question a little bit earlier, but luckily there's a recording that will be released, so hopefully you'll be able to watch it back. And then a question from Barbara: how would you implement a profit share framework? Would you divide the profits equally or based on base salary / role?
Yeah, I'm glad we got to this one because I think I saw it pop up a little bit earlier. I've seen 3 different approaches. So one is everyone gets the same amount, regardless of their job. The other extreme is everyone gets a portion tied to, like, as a percentage of their salary. The approach I kind of like the most is the one in the middle, which is that if you're at the same level, so let's just assume, I don't know, it's a 10 level structure. Everyone who's at level 5 would get the same. So even if you're in marketing or you're a software developer or something like that, I think that for me gives more of a sense of like, again, you're all in a role that has what we've defined as the same level of scope and responsibility and impact and those sorts of things. And I think that's a real fair way from my perspective of being able to convey that through a profit share. I think sometimes the sort of the one value for everybody isn't as impactful. I think it tends to make it a little bit more like generic, in the sense that those who are towards the top of your job level framework and invariably have higher salaries, it may not be as meaningful of a number. I think it gives you the best of both worlds, in the sense that the numbers like relatively contextualized to the people and their salaries at that level, and is fair to people at that level, and then sort of scales across your framework. That's the approach I like best.
Agreed. Agreed. So I was just thinking, Matt, so we've got a couple of minutes, but I was just thinking, do we agree too much? Do I agree too much with you? Maybe we need to do another session where there's more cognitive tension and we have an argument.
Yeah, maybe we need to come up with our opinions ahead of time and then like pick the ones that we vehemently disagree on. I'm trying to do this like great debate with some people, some other like HR professionals that I know, and it's around pay for performance. Because I think a lot of people have strong opinions around how it should work. I clearly have strong opinions. I'm sure there's plenty of incredible people that have done amazing things with merit-based, salary increases and things like that. So I'm always open to hearing other opinions. But yeah, the next one will have to be I don't know, a like discussion.
But look, thank you so much for being such a great guest. Thanks to our audience for the interaction and the questions. We went completely off of what we thought we would discuss, but so glad that it was helpful. And let us know if you'd like more of a deep dive on one particular topic. There was a lot to cover. But yeah, super. Thank you so much, everyone. Matt, thanks for joining, and anyone else over in Australia, thanks for joining in the evening. And see you on the next one.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
All right. Bye.
Bye.